What's going on, Zachariah? Kaine Enabled. Back once again with the Fatal Frame retrospective. In the last video, we took a deep dive look into Fatal Frame 1, the inaugural title in the franchise. The link to that should pop up above my head at some point if you happen to miss that. But for today, we're going to take a look at Fatal Frame 2, Crimson Butterfly. Enough with the intro, let's get right into it.
Having already traversed the survival horror landscape in the years leading up to the release of the first Fatal Frame, it should come as no surprise that the genre continued to put some of the most iconic titles ever in the following years. While titles like Silent Hill continued the if it ain't broke don't fix it approach, releasing new entries under the same style mechanics with better graphics and deeper stories, other IPs like Resident Evil attempted to break from the norm of their previous releases and try new gameplay styles in attempts to further expand the genre. On top of this, the success of the aforementioned properties gave new developers the motivation they needed to release their own hellish creations into the landscape. Shortly after the release of the first Fatal Frame, Makoto Shibata made the decision to begin production on the next entry in the franchise, however, not for the reason many would expect. Typically, a sequel for an IP gets the green light after a really good sales window, high praise of something the game did right, or a combination of the two. With Fatal Frame, Tecmo had a different reason behind their motivation. After spending the years prior pouring their hearts into the first entry, Shibata and his team were displeased to hear the number of consumers that just simply didn't finish the game. The majority reason given why so many bailed before the ending was that it was just too scary. The cut and dry seek and find story infused with the tormented spirits of persons past wandering about, along with the tragic backstory of Kirie, combined to make the entire experience just difficult for many to digest. Fear is an extremely delicate emotion to target. When overexposed, it's easier for most to just simply walk away from whatever's causing this fear. Expecting nothing but horror is certainly a niche audience. However, when infused with another, more intriguing emotion like sadness or curiosity, the audience has historically had a better rate of retention. Believing in the concept of the game, Tecmo used this as their driving force to put out another entry. Instead of dialing down on the horror aspect, Shibata opted instead to take the story of the game up a notch, hoping the consumer's investment in the characters and the backstory would outweigh the paranormal gameplay and the haunting atmosphere created in the first game. Many of the same Tecmo members involved with the creation of the first Fatal Frame agreed to return alongside Shibata and producer Keisuke Kikuchi, helping to give the universe they created in the first game a feeling of uniform familiarity. From the art direction of Hasegawa to the sound of Toyota, who worked beside the first title's composer Shigeki Okuda, having these minds come together once again hoped to make the game truly feel like a sequel instead of a reboot. And so, less than 2 years after the release of the first game, Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly was released in Japan in November of 2003, December in North America, and April the following year in Europe. Keeping things uniform, the Japanese version kept the Zero title, as well as the Europeans' Project Zero, both of which keeping the Crimson Butterfly subtitle the same as the North American release. And just like the first, Crimson Butterfly was released solely for Sony's PlayStation 2 in its original life cycle. However, an Xbox version titled Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly Director's Cut was ported to the Xbox in late 2004. Although after the fact, Tecmo openly stated that this release was mainly used as an attempt to pull new fans into the third entry Tecmo had already began development on. Fatal Frame 2 also received a complete remake in 2012 with the new name Project Zero 2 Deep Crimson Butterfly, or often referred to as Project Zero 2 The Wii Edition. Unfortunately for North American players, the Wii remake was only released in Japan and Europe. Each of the subsequent releases added new gameplay mechanics and features not included in the original, but of course we'll get into that in due time. An original story vamped up with the goal of keeping their audience on the edge of their seat from intro to credits. A tall task, but one Shibata and Tecmo felt necessity to take on. This is Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly. Beginning with the tone of Crimson Butterfly, the atmosphere in the game feels very eerie, almost like a pair of eyes are watching from behind you at all times. The story takes place in Minakami Village, or better put, the ruins of once what was Minakami Village. Often referred to as the Lost Village or All Gods Village throughout the story, this small isolated village, once filled with life, now presents nothing but cold, abandoned darkness at every turn. Houses boarded up and walkways long since used, overran with weeds and dust, help give Crimson Butterfly its own identity far separate from Fatal Frame 1. The opening cinematic in Crimson Butterfly is cut more like a theatrical trailer for a horror movie, honestly, with peaks and valleys meant to draw the consumer in from the start. even featuring their own movie trailer style voice narrator.
On the day of the ceremony, the village vanished.
A far cry from the opening scene in Fatal Frame 1, and this is a recurring theme throughout most of Fatal Frame 2. From the subtle to the obvious, the team at Tecmo made sure to improve areas in the first that they felt hurt the completion ratio. Control-wise, Fatal Frame 2 took from the first entry and expanded with many quality of life improvements. The standard third-person behind-the-back PS2 style survival horror pseudo-tank controls return with upgrades like the ability to move freely while aiming the Camera Obscura. This alone is one of the biggest and best differences between this game and Fatal Frame 1. Instead of having to run just far enough away from your pursuers, swinging around, then aiming them down, Crimson Butterfly simply lets you pull up your camera and use the right joystick to move in any direction, albeit at a slower speed. Nevertheless, I can't stress enough how satisfied I was in this change alone. Now the flip side of the controls. There are portions in this game that act very escort mission-y. This is when things could get a little bit tedious and slightly clunky. With no ability to outright engage with the second character, you'll find yourself at its mercy sometimes, blocking your way forward or moving so far off the screen they simply stop walking and stand in place calling out for you. It wasn't too often, thankfully, because the first portion of this game revolves around that, and the unresponsiveness of that second character made me think I was in for an absolute nightmare. I just got to the point where if they were in my way, I'd run forward constantly trying to knock them off balance and then hope they'd reset, and if I'd pull too far ahead, I'd continue to move forward to the next area where they would just magically teleport back by my side once opening a door. No harm, no foul, I've just always hated escort missions. As far as the camera choices in Crimson Butterfly, it's almost as if Kikuchi and his team live by the simple motto, if it isn't broke, don't fix it, but if it can be improved, then let's make it better when creating Fatal Frame 2. The same camera choices are used for the roaming portions of the game with slight changes to other areas. The camera combat's one of those areas they expanded on in Crimson Butterfly. In the first game, the spirits were trackable within the camera's viewfinder at all times. They could fade in and out of clear view, but they were almost always on a straight line trajectory from one side to the other. In Fatal Frame 2, Shibata used an approach he liked to call never-ending loops, that being the dissecting of just how spirits may truly behave in reality, removing their line of movement from the first game and allowing the spirits to disappear from where you see them and then reappear in an entirely different location. This vision was inspired from both Shibata's dreams as well as iconic horror stories like The Shining. Spotting your enemy, locking them down in the viewfinder, holding onto that shot for as long as possible to build your spirit meter, only for them to fade away and appear just to the side of you, giving you only a second or two to react. Definitely a quality of life improvement that helped keep the player alert at all times. On top of just the combat itself, the entire interface and focus of the Camera Obscura itself has changed in Fatal Frame 2. The Xbox port of the first entry saw a few of these changes first, which makes sense after finding out the Xbox port of Crimson Butterfly was more of an attempt to draw our interest to the third game. So, if you played the original version of the first game and the Xbox Director's Cut, then a lot of this new interface will seem familiar to you. To other players that only played the OG iteration, Crimson Butterfly's camera gameplay feels like a complete revision. No longer are spirit orbs used on just one effect at a time. They're now placed into a grid-like leveling system, kind of like those RPG skill trees you see in Final Fantasy. The skill tree in Crimson Butterfly ranges from the typical range, accumulation, and sensitivity options featured in the first, along with the option to increase the effectiveness of each of the lens's power-ups, from the ability to slow the spirit down, freeze them in their tracks, or take a concentrated blast photo that deals more damage than the rest. Each of the power-ups in the skill tree have 3 levels, each of which require 1 spirit orb to grant access to. After unlocking each FX level, the levels then require a specific number of points gathered from the grade of photos taken throughout your story. This is a refreshing change from the first game, which I found myself stockpiling spirit orbs, not knowing how common these things were, instead of using them on any specific boss encounter at any moment. Fatal Frame 2 allowed the players to concentrate on just how they wanted the dispatch of these spirits in the game, whether it be to dump all of your points into the rapid fire at far distance approach, or waiting for the Fatal Frame indicator to signal for that up-close mugshot. The combat interface is another avenue that took from the first game's Xbox port and improved. Lining the spirits up in your viewfinder slowly builds up the spirit power of the shot, causing more damage the longer the shot's held, up to the point of no return, seeing that yellow circle in the viewfinder turn red, indicating that the spirit's getting ready to attack. This is also a much stronger shot than the standard yellow circle. However, if you're feeling really risky, holding the shot for several more seconds after it switches to red triggers a pulsing red light in the viewfinder. And that means this is your absolute last chance to take the shot before taking damage. Now, this window is a second at best, but in that second the spirit is at its absolute most vulnerable, causing what's called a fatal frame shot that does the absolute maximum amount of damage. Coupled with the camera attachments that make an audible noise at the precise moment, and another that allows for combo shots in the seconds following that fatal frame, bosses can be shredded in 3 to 4 well-timed photos, making it feel like you're in complete control of the battles. Throughout the game, as I got better with the camera, I actually found myself walking the spirits down, popping off 3 to 4 shot combos, feeling my adrenaline pump with every perfect shot I got. Much like the first game, the enemy encounters aren't the only ghosts in the game. Once again, those many quick-time spirits pop up in and out of specific areas, cued only by the sound of a heartbeat replacing the background noise. Appearing for 3 to 4 seconds, you have a chance to pull up your camera and capture these spirits and add them to your in-game catalog. The spirits seem much easier to capture this go around, honestly, hanging on for another second or two before fading away. And more often than not, I was pulling up my viewfinder and it would automatically aim at the spirit in Crimson Butterfly, unlike the reliance of your filament from the first game. A few are instrumental to the plot, and those ones stay on the screen for 10 seconds or even longer before they fade away, giving you an almost guaranteed shot to take. But again, these are all side items that in no way hurt your gameplay if you just so happen to miss one. First aid in the form of sacred water, herbal medicines, and stone mirrors all make their return in Crimson Butterfly, with no evolution to the concept, other than the stone mirrors themselves don't vanish from where they're found. In the first game, specific stone mirrors were only located in that specific spot for the remainder of the current night that you were on, which was something I stated before that I just couldn't stand. I expected Crimson Butterfly to be much of the same. Writing down locations of each of these in my notebook, I was pleased to see them in the same spot at the end of the game. But with that being said though, this game seemed way easier than the first one in my opinion, to the point where I didn't even have to use my first stone mirror. I just picked it up and it sat in my inventory the entire playthrough. The late big boss encounters ignore the effects of the stone mirror in Crimson Butterfly as well, so you don't need to bank on just having one on standby right before the final boss. The last portion of the game plays out as a one-hit game over, but don't let that freak you out too much. Just play this game with the knowledge that it's way more forgiving than the first game, with plenty of heals scattered in countless corners throughout the village, and you'll find yourself enjoying the in-game credits in no time. The audio genius of Toyota and Okuda make its return, and it's as hauntingly beautiful as ever in Crimson Butterfly, further expanding the atmospheric audio along with brand new background sounds that again never really feel like composed songs, more like a collection of creepy noises patterned melodically enough to just fill the void of lifelessness throughout the village. Games commonly go for either no sound at all or an overly produced piece of music. But much like the first, Toyota knew the effect that a simple, repetitive chime of a musical triangle or the echo pluck of a minor string would present to its consumer. Unsettling uncertainty. This is the best choice that could have been made for the atmosphere in Crimson Butterfly. Sadly, puzzles were not as big a focal point in Crimson Butterfly, however. In fact, outside of one sequential puzzle, several rotation-based puzzles, and one doll puzzle, there aren't any that leap to my mind throughout the entire game. I always say how important puzzle solving is for survival horror games, and I like to mention them every time I break a game like this down, so I felt the need to mention them, or better yet, the lack thereof in Fatal Frame 2. The story is set in the Minakami region of Japan within a village holding the same name in 1988, 2 years after the events of the first Fatal Frame. The main protagonists are twin sister Mio and Mayu Amakura, who find themselves in the wooded area surrounding the village, visiting an old play spot they had frequented as children. Stumbling on what looks to be the abandoned village, the girls explore the remains only to find themselves wrapped in the center of a chaotic web of betrayal, sacrifice, death, and rituals. As the story unfolds, the Amakura sisters fight to balance finding the truth of what really happened from the village, along with making it out safely.
So that's the basic cover page of the story without deep diving in, which of course we have to initiate a spoiler warning, which is there. So this game is separated into a chapter-based system, much different than the night-based system of the first Fatal Frame. It's all taking place over what seems to be one full night. With that being said, the spoiler warning's been issued, so if you're in it for this, let's go.
The story begins with a flashback of Mio Amakura calling out to her sister Mayu as she apologizes over and over, as the scene travels down the side of a cliff where we see the body of Mayu laying. The flashback ends as Mio, now much older, finds herself sitting on a rock in the same wooded area as the flashback, blankly staring off at a small stream. Her daydream is ended as her sister Mayu places her hand on either shoulder of Mio, as the two of them reminisce on the time they'd spent in this area as children, this being the very reason of their visit today, as Mayu notes that this entire area will be gone soon, replaced with a large scenic lake, as she sits on the same rock as Mio to try to rest her heavily bandaged right knee. We then see another flashback of moments before the first, showing a childlike Mayu walking the edge of the cliff in the wooded area, then slipping, hearing her screams as the vision ends. Mio turns to her sister, noticing that Mayu is no longer behind her. Instead, she's some distance away chasing a butterfly into the deep of the woods. Moving towards Mayu, Mio passes by a seemingly random stone with a carved image of two females embracing. In doing so, the entire world around her appears to shift as if she passed through some kind of magical barrier. The trees, skies, and surrounding hills all becoming noticeably darker as she struggles to maintain direction, losing track of Mayu in the midst of this chaotic experience. She finds Mayu again, still chasing close behind as her sister continues to pursue what looks now like a glowing red butterfly. As she closes the distance, Mayu appears to change into an entirely different person, a young girl dressed in an all-white kimono, as Mio catches up, placing her hands on Mayu's shoulder, only to see her vanish right before her eyes. Alone in the now moonlit forest, Mio calls out to her sister as she notices a faint glow of light over the horizon. Using this as her guide, Mio heads to the direction and hopes to find her sister. Reaching the top of the hill, Mio sees a vision of another kimono-dressed girl.
I'm so sorry.
Approaching what looks to be a makeshift shrine, Mio spots another glowing butterfly along with her sister Mayu gazing blankly over the edge of the cliff. Reaching her sister as a group of those same red glowing butterflies all fly away from where Mayu is standing, Mio sees what caught her sister's attention. Down in the canyon alongside the cliff sits what looks to be an abandoned village, an area Mayu calls the Lost Village. Mayu recalls an old story she was told about a village that was plagued by a curse, resulting in that village and all of its inhabitants being trapped in limbo forever. Overcome with curiosity, the two head down to this village to see if this is the village from the old tales. Along the path towards the village, they find a bag filled with several newspaper clippings detailing the disappearance of a local geologist, Masumi Makimura, from the area after scouting it in preparation for a dam that was planning to be built in the location of the village. The search for Makimura was called off after 10 days as detailed in the second newspaper clipping. Along with these two news articles is a picture of Makimura alongside a young female. Nothing else of substance was found in the bag as the girls continued their journey down into the village. Arriving at the base of the village, the two noticed the glow of a lantern moving across the window from inside a nearby house. Mio, who feels slightly uneasy upon arriving to the village, is able to relax just a little as she feels her reassuring hand of her sister resting on her shoulder. However, as Mayu walks past her, Mio realizes that the hand was not her sister's. In shock, Mio snaps around only to see nobody else there. This only further increases the fear within her as those old tales are seemingly becoming more true. Gathering herself, Mio and Mayu move forward and enter the house they had seen the light coming from earlier. Entering the front door, the two find it in absolute desertion with signs of nobody recently being inside. Mayu then suddenly begins shaking and uncomfortably wincing in fear, paralyzed in place. Rushing to her sister, Mio touches her shoulder only to see a vision. One of the girl in the photo they found up on the hill walking down these halls calling out for Masumi. Rounding a corner, the next vision shows Masumi over the top of the girl with his hands wrapped around her throat, as she struggles before inevitably succumbing to the strangulation and then dying. The vision comes to an end with a girl in an all-white kimono laughing hysterically. Moving through the abandoned house, the girls find several diaries, one of which details rumors of a village wiped out from the face of the earth on the day of a grand ceremony. The journal, which addresses the village's fate as pure rumor, also mentions a set of stones placed at the edge of the forest acting as a portal or a gate to this lost village. Once passing these stones, it's believed that a person cannot return to their normal world, trapped in the same limbo as the fate of the doomed people of the village. There are several other diaries scattered about that identify the writer as the woman in the photo and the vision named Mayuko as she attempts to make contact of any kind with Masumi. After spotting what looks to be Mayuko walking across the hallway ahead, Mio and Mayu give chase, finding themselves in a small study den where Mio finds a flashlight along with a file named the Camera Obscura pointers, covering the development and details on how to use a special camera called the Camera Obscura. Within the same room, she also finds what appears to be said camera discarded carelessly in one of the corners. Taking possession of the camera gives Mio a vision of a man standing in front of a burial cairn. Raising the camera to the sight shows dozens of hands rushing towards the man, causing him to stumble backwards, dropping the camera in a panic before abruptly ending. As the girls attempt to gather themselves following the vision, they're interrupted by the sounds of footsteps approaching the room they're in. Raising the camera and aiming it at the door, Mio spots the spirit of Mayuko blankly staring at the two of them. Taking a photo seemed to do exactly what the file had indicated as Mayuko's spirit vanishes into thin air, allowing the two to freely exit the room. As they head to the exit of the building with haste, Mayu spots what appears to once again be Mayuko standing in front of another door on the first floor, again staring aimlessly at the twins. Leading the girls throughout the building, they come across a collection of Mayuko's diaries, ranging from encounters with a girl in a blood-stained white kimono, to her final diary, which breaks down into ramblings of Masumi still being in the village, hoping that he'd come find her, with the final entry simply being the words, "He came." The two are then faced with an angry Mayuko, repeating the word "why" over and over. As Mayuko attempts to attack the girls, Mio raises the Camera Obscura, blasting a photo of Mayuko, capturing her spirit before any harm can be done. As she exercises the spirit, a vision is seen once again of Masumi murdering Mayuko, with the white-draped kimono girl laughing as it happens. The vision then switches to Mayu, once again chasing what she calls a crimson butterfly before abruptly ending. Awakening on the floor of the room, Mio quickly realizes that Mayu is missing. Gathering herself, she heads to the exit and attempts to locate her sister and leave the village together. Looking for any clues to help locate her sister, Mio finds many diaries scattered about detailing ceremonial rituals this village believed in many years ago, along with a detailed portion describing a gate to hell and a forbidden ritual performed to prevent this gate from getting any closer to the plane of our earth. As Mio heads back to the landing towards the front of the house, she catches Mayu walking out the front door. Calling out to her, Mayu turns and simply says,
"I'm sorry. I have to go."
There's then a switch to what looks to be from the perspective of Mayu, following a collection of crimson butterflies along a path through the village, before stopping in front of a girl dressed in a white kimono. Mio heads in the same direction she just seen Mayu heading in. Moving deeper into the village, Mio approaches a house where a boy with snow-white hair appears in an open window, calling out to her. However, not calling her by her own name, instead referring to her as Yae. He tells her that she needs to get her sister Sae and leave the village before the ritual starts. Understandably confused, Mio uses the information that the boy had given to her that her sister was in the ceremony master's house and heads in that direction. Mio travels to the center of the village, arriving at the front doors of the ceremony master's house. Entering the doors, she spots what looks to be Mayu several meters ahead. She loses sight of her when the flashlight she had been carrying spontaneously dies upon entering the building. As she progresses further into the building, the scene once again switches to the perspective of Mayu, again wandering down a long corridor and into a room where she approaches the girl in the blood-soaked white kimono before the vision ends. Following this lead, Mio moves forward, finding herself in the same room. As she advances around the corners of the winding room, the floor suddenly becomes littered with dozens of bodies. Stumbling backwards in attempts to avoid the massive lifelessness, Mio turns just in time to see the girl in the blood-soaked kimono laughing hysterically at the sight of death surrounding the two of them. As she continues her maniacal laughter, the twisted spirit of a man wrapped in ropes begins to move towards Mio. As Mio raises her camera and takes a photo, it's clear that whatever this spirit is, it ignores any effects the Camera Obscura possesses. Instead, opting to escape, Mio exits the room and moves forward, now more than ever desperately looking for her sister. As she continues to search, Mio once again finds diaries further detailing the village's sacrifice rituals involving purifying the grounds of the earth to prevent the gates of hell from reaching it, as well as the use of twin shrine maidens to act as the village's guardian deities and protect the village as they turn into crimson butterflies and return to the village. As she reaches for yet another journal, Mio sees another vision, one of two men arriving to Minakami Village, or as the older of the men call it, All Gods Village. Approaching the front gates, the two are greeted by another man along with his twin girls dressed in solid white kimonos. As the housemaster allows entry, their vision abruptly ends. Recovering the diary, this diary dives deeper into the forbidden ritual, revealing its true name, the Crimson Sacrifice Ritual, involving twins helping seal the gates of hell. The diary also indicates there is a traditional visible ceremony, but also details a second ceremony if the first one is to fail. If the second ceremony is to also fail, what comes next is referred to as the repentance. The gates of hell open on earth, darkening the sky and releasing the dead into the world. The diary finishes up speaking of a man named Munakata and friends in the village, twin boys named Itsuki and Mutsuki, needing to be located in order to find out more about the village's past. Mio continues her exploration of the house, stumbling into a doll shrine room where, behind a privacy wall, she finds Mayu fast asleep on the floor. After waking up, Mayu goes on to tell Mio the reason she had left was because somebody had called out to her, telling her to come back and complete the ritual. Happy to see each other, the two embrace, reassuring their intentions to keep their promise to stay together forever.
Stay with me forever and ever. Of course, we promised. For now, let's get out of here.
As the two head for the door, Mio finds a diary on the ground where Mayu had been laying. The diary belongs to a girl named Yae, the same name the white-haired boy had called Mio back in the village. The diary makes mention of a man named Munakata and his teacher traveling to the village to check on Itsuki, who had been locked up in the local storage room. Mio makes the connection that this is in fact the white-haired boy she had ran into earlier. The second half of the diary is written by another girl named Sae, mentioning that a man named Mr. Makabe had taken a picture of her and her sister Yae that left her looking distorted. Then she finishes the entry stating that her goal was to become one with Yae forever. Along with the diary was the photo she had spoke of earlier, which features Yae and Sae holding hands, with Yae appearing normal and Sae's face being unrecognizable. The sisters return to the room where Mio had encountered the invulnerable spirit previously. Mayu runs ahead, turning the corner and vanishing before Mio can react. Sprinting after her, Mio is stopped dead in her tracks as she rounds the corner and sees Mayu, standing motionless with her head down, in the exact spot the blood-soaked kimono girl was earlier. Snapping her out of her trance-like state, the two exit the room and continue to move toward the entrance of the house. After finding a diary from the ceremony master that speaks of his pain and sadness knowing that his twins were doomed from birth, he reveals the horrific truth of the Crimson Sacrifice ritual, that being that the elder twin is required to kill the younger twin as to fulfill the need of the ritual. It's at this point the girls arrive in the master's study where Mio is able to gather even more insight into this terrible ritual the village is accustomed to from a collection of tomes. One speaking of the fate of the sacrificed twins, seeing them changed into crimson butterflies and returning to the village after the ritual, acting as guardians, parting the skies and allowing heaven's light to shine down into the village. Another detailing their repentance as a punishment if they are to fail the Crimson Sacrifice ritual. The most interesting tome of all is the one revealing that quite the opposite of the belief of the villagers, it is in fact the elder twin that is to be sacrificed in the Crimson Sacrifice ritual, leaving the latter child to stay behind watching over the world. Along with these tomes is another of the ceremony master's diaries speaking of a visitor that arrived to the village that he would use to sacrifice in those hidden rituals in hopes to prevent the repentance spoken of in one of his tomes, referring to the sacrificed person as the Kusabi, having them endure as much pain as physically possible prior to the sacrifice in order to satisfy the gates of hell. If this isn't twisted enough, the ceremony master also indicates his intentions to use his own daughters, Saya and Yae, in the ritual in hopes to cleanse a failed ritual attempt by another member of the village named Tachibana as he attempted to sacrifice his twins, Itsuki and Mutsuki. However, as detailed in the separate diary written by Yae, her intention was to escape the village with Itsuki and Sae to avoid the ritual and be with her sister forever. Interestingly enough, the second page of the journal written by Sae states that she had no interest in running away, but if that was the only way that she could remain with her sister, then she would do just that. Wrapping up a collection of diaries left behind by the sisters, Yae writes of Munakata's teacher's ill fate, being turned into the Kusabi mentioned in the tomes. This Kusabi is that seemingly invincible rope-bound spirit Mio had encountered earlier on in the Master's house. As Sae's response insists to Yae that the two of them need to go through with this crimson sacrifice in order to prevent anybody else from dying, the journal then comes to an abrupt end. Mio and Mayu exit the study and move to the area outside where they approach a chamber that looks to be one of the preparation rooms for the village's rituals. Entering the chamber, they find yet another diary belonging to the ceremony master. This one a little more interesting than the rest, indicating that Yae had in fact ran away from the village. However, instead of keeping her promise to Sae, she chose to run away alone. Not knowing if this will affect the ritual in any way, the ceremony master indicates that his intention is to use Sae as a soul shrine maiden for the Crimson Sacrifice ritual. After exploring the inside of a small prison-like structure, Mio finds nothing more than journal entries once again inside detailing the hellish abyss, the sacrifices, and the mourners that spent eternity underground guarding the abyss, sewing their eyes shut to prevent themselves from looking down into the abyss's torturous pit, an act that causes irreversible personal damage. Exiting the cell, Mio first, the door slams shut behind her, trapping Mayu inside, forcing Mio to continue her exploration for a key to her cell. As Mayu pleads for Mio not to leave her alone, a flashback re-encountering the entire events of their childhood play back, showing Mio playfully running from her sister Mayu in the woods, telling her,
Hurry up! You better hurry or I'll leave you behind!
Causing Mayu to run faster, resulting in her slipping and falling off the side of the cliff. Calling out for Mayu, the vision ends as Mio looks over the edge onto the forest's floor while she sees a severely injured Mayu laying.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Leaving Mayu's side in order to find the key, Mio heads to a location on the marked map she had found in the room, hoping to find a key or something to help free Mayu. After exploring the area on the map, Mio is able to enter a secret passage in one of the village's houses, leading her into an underground tunnel system of the village. It's here where she encounters one of those mourners mentioned in the folklorist's diary. With its eyes bandaged shut, these spirits rely on their sound as they navigate from the underground caverns, eternally acting as protectors of the hellish abyss. From one of these ghastly spirits falls the key Mio needs to free Mayu. So, after retrieving the key, Mio makes a mad dash back to the ceremony master's house and back to the cell her sister was trapped in. Opening the cell, Mio is shocked to see that yet again Mayu is missing. Only a note from Mayu apologizing to Itsuki along with a photo of Itsuki trapped in the same storage house Mio had found him in earlier. As Mio places the note into her pocket, a flashback begins showing Itsuki hiding in the forest as the ritual cultists run by. Then exiting from behind the tree, Itsuki tells Sae and Yae, who are both accompanying him, to go on ahead and escape the village. The girls agree and take off running through the forest where an almost mirror-like set of events happens, seeing Sae struggling to keep up with Yae as they run through the cliffside, before seeing Sae slip and tumble down the side of the hill. It then skips forward to see Sae being captured and returning to the village, insisting,
Yae will come back for me. She will.
The flashback ends as once again the perspective of Mayu plays out, showing her like she had done multiple times throughout the night, following a path led by a collection of crimson butterflies before fading away. Leaving the cell and the master's house entirely, Mio finds herself back in the village where Mayu's vision had ended. Here she sees Mayu walking across the breezeway above her as a demented spirit follows close behind. Entering the building she had seen Mayu pass through, Mio learns of more details on what happens during and after the Crimson Sacrifice rituals. Following the events of the sacrifice, the remaining twin, which is referred to as the Remaining, endures permanent grief, resulting in their hair turning snow white. This explains the reason Itsuki's hair is this color now, even though in every photo she had found about the properties, he had the same dark color as his brother Mutsuki. This also helps Mio realize that the reason Itsuki appeared to be grieving every time she had ran into him throughout the night concluding that Mutsuki was the brother sacrificed at the hands of Itsuki in order to protect Yae and Sae from being forced to partake in the same ritual. However, due to both Itsuki and Mutsuki not believing in the ritual, as well as the strength of their bond, their ritual failed, resulting in Mutsuki being lost forever, however not becoming a crimson butterfly. On top of the tragedy involving the Tachibana family, Mio discovers another, involving the twins of the house she is currently in, Akane and Izami Kiryu. This sacrifice being even worse if possible after finding out that these girls were only 11 years old at the time of their sacrifice. So young in fact that Akane, the surviving sister, struggled to even place her hands around her sister's throat and apply enough pressure to kill her. After the sacrifice, Akane fell into a manic depression when her father, a doll maker, decided to create a doll in Izami's likeness. This worked all too well, as Akane believed this doll was so real that she began having full-blown conversations with it. Sensing this, the girl's father decided to throw the doll into the hellish abyss, but before he had a chance, the doll, which had been possessed by another spirit, told Akane of Yoshitatsu's plan, resulting in Akane killing her father. The same spirit that had taken control of the doll then gained full control of Akane's soul, corrupting her and resulting in the entire Kiryu family being lost forever. After encountering the evil spirits of the Kiryu twins and exorcising them thanks to the Camera Obscura, Mio enters the underground passage called the Earth Bridge, which links the Kiryu house to the Tachibana house, the house belonging to the family of Itsuki and Mutsuki. As she moves through the tunnel, Mio hears another voice behind her. As Sae slowly walks forward, Mio raises her camera. However, when doing so, Mio finds nothing in the viewfinder. Yet she can still hear the maniacal laughter of Sae getting closer and closer. Lowering the camera, Mio only has seconds to react as she still sees Sae within arm's reach. In the chaos of this event, Mio drops the camera as she turns to run and escape. With Sae closing the distance quickly, Mio chooses to leave the camera behind as she ascends a ladder, taking her into the Tachibana house. Continuing to flee from the pursuit of Sae in Tachibana house, Mio keeps up with her search for her sister Mayu, discovering a diary from an unknown author that revisits the events that led to Itsuki being locked in the storage room. The villagers had captured him and condemned him there after learning that he had played a part in helping Yae escape, preventing the Crimson Sacrifice ritual from taking place as intended. Reaching the top of the staircase, Mio spots Mayu ahead, turning a corner just out of view. Rushing to that corner, Mio sees Mayu again, this time standing motionless with her head lowered like she had done earlier in the night. As she calls out to her sister, Mayu then turns back to Mio and slowly begins walking towards her down the dimly lit hallway. Passing a point in the hallway shrouded by darkness, Mio is taken by surprise as emerging back into the light is not Mayu but Sae once again. Sae continues her pursuit as Mio makes her way through the Tachibana house, finding a door leading to what's referred to as Heaven's Bridge, the second floor bridge Mio had seen Mayu walking across earlier that connects the Tachibana house again to the Kiryu house. Crossing the bridge and re-entering House Kiryu seems to halt the pursuit of Sae, at least for the moment. Moving back through Kiryu house, Mio once again returns to the Earth Bridge underground passage and retrieves her Camera Obscura. Able to dispatch of evil spirits again, Mio continues to travel new areas in the Tachibana and Kiryu house, leading her to a new room where she sees Mayu on her knees weeping. The room is once again behind a locked door, which is key as bound to the spirit of Itsuki's younger sister, Chitose Tachibana. Thanks to the clues in a collection of journals left about the Tachibana house, Mio is able to locate Chitose and obtain the key, leading Mio back to Mayu's makeshift prison where, to no surprise, Mio once again finds an empty cell. In fact, the only thing Mio finds inside is a journal from Mr. Makabe's assistant, Ryozo Munakata, addressing to Itsuki, informing him that Munakata would be leaving the village with Yae and Sae, then he would be returning once he got the girls to safety, as well as another journal detailing an escape route through a previously sealed passage inside a Kyorieha's shrine, high atop Minakami village. Closing the journal, Mio is alerted by a collection of footsteps creaking down the hallway leading to the room that she's in. As the creator of the footsteps is revealed, Mio is sent into a panic as she sees the blood-soaked kimono of Sae slowly peeling through the darkness and moving towards her. Sae continues to move forward, then just out of view of Mio. As the knob of the door begins turning slowly, the fear within Mio continues to increase. The door flies open only to see Mayu instead of Sae running to Mio and throwing her hands around her sister, begging her again.
Don't leave me. Of course I won't leave you behind. I kept looking for you. Now let's get out of here.
Entering a passageway in the trunk of a large tree, the two are able to locate the locking mechanism keeping the passageway in Kureha's shrine sealed. But as they approach, Mayu collapses to the ground, seemingly exhausted from the events of the night. As Mayu places her hand on her sister, she sees a vision of herself walking through an underground cavern, past a mass collection of candles, then down a set of stairs before reaching a pit in the middle of the room. Across the pit, Mio spots a mourner guarding the hellish abyss, asking,
Where is my sister?
As the mourner points down into the pit and Mio peers over its edge, her vision abruptly ends, leaving a confused Mio standing between her unconscious sister and the mechanism preventing their escape from Minakami Village. Leaving Mayu for the moment, Mio makes her way across to the storage room building. As she enters the building, a flashback begins, showing Sae entering the building and attempts to free Itsuki and escape the village. Unfortunately, as she draws closer to the enclosure, she sees Itsuki hanging from the support beams of the building. Filled with the eternal grief after sacrificing his brother, Itsuki was unable to cope with this and deal with the everlasting pain of loss, instead choosing to end his own life. As the vision ends, villagers appear behind Sae, instructing her that the ritual was still to begin. Shocked at the reveal that the boy she had been speaking to throughout the night had been dead all along, Mio quickly gathers herself before entering the cell once holding Itsuki. She finds a journal filled with entries of remorse, begging for Musuki's forgiveness for the failing of the ritual and his inability to turn his brother into a crimson butterfly, along with a map highlighting the location of 4 family crest pinwheels spread about the village. These 4 family crest pinwheels were required to unlock that mechanism to allow their escape from Minakami Village. After successfully scanning the village and obtaining the family's crest pinwheels, Mio returns to where she had left Mayu and inserts them into the shrine, releasing the locking mechanism to the underground passage at Kureha's shrine. Tending to her sister once more, Mio wakes Mayu up as she says,
No matter what happens, I'll forgive you.
Heading up the stairs leading to the shrine, the twins are stopped by a collection of the village's inhabitants, rushing towards the two in attempts to prevent their escape so to see the Crimson Sacrifice ritual through. Racing to the top of the staircase, Mio turns back to see several villagers surrounding Mayu, who pleads for her sister's help. As she turns to run back to her sister, several more villagers then turn their attention to Mio, creating a distraction and allowing the others to capture Mayu and disappear back down the staircase with her. Exercising these spirits and rushing back down the stairs, the perspective switches again to that of Mayu, once again following the path of crimson butterflies leading her across the bridge connecting the village to the ceremony master's house. As she climbs a small set of stairs and enters a courtyard with 2 ritual priests bowing their heads on either side, the vision of Mayu then fades and Mio continues her pursuit to rescue her sister. As Mio reaches the same bridge, she sees a group of these priests surrounding Mayu as they continue to march onward through the doors of the ceremony master's house. Mayu, who looks to switch from herself to Sae, then back to herself again, willingly yet emotionlessly keeps her pace as her company, before crossing through the entryway and seeing the door close. Following the group, Mio moves through the house searching everywhere for her sister. As she draws closer, visions of Mayu's journey down the path of crimson butterflies continues to show throughout the building, leading Mio in the right direction, which ends up being the ritual site underneath the building. Opening the doors to the ritual room, Mio sees a group of priests along with the ritual master in the middle of a sacrifice. The guest of honor is unfortunately Mr. Makabe, who is strung by ropes high above the group. Another vision then shows of what happens after this portion of the ritual, as the priests, each holding a rope attached to a specific limb on Mr. Makabe's body, as he is pulled in all directions outstretched over the hellish abyss, let go of their ropes, causing Mr. Makabe to fall into the abyss. Mio realizing that this sacrifice is the one that resulted in the creation of the Kusabi, with Mr. Makabe being the Kusabi. The priests halt their ritual and turn their attention to Mio. However, before they can cause any harm, Mio utilizes the Camera Obscura, causing the priests, along with the ritual master, to perish from the earth, allowing her to continue her search for her sister. Heading through a new set of doors inside of the ritual room, Mio begins to travel through a collection of underground tunnels, ending up in a room lined with hundreds of lit candles, much like the one she had seen in her vision earlier in the night. As she passes an apparition of twins embracing at the center of the candles, Mio moves down another set of stairs in the back of the cavern, where she's stopped in her tracks by an ominous feeling that she's not alone. Turning back, she finds herself viewing a flashback inside of the flashback herself, as Sae continues to be escorted down the stairwell into the darkness before her. As due to Yae never returning to save her sister, the events of the single sacrifice play out, first seeing Sae being hung from a rope attached to the support beam just outside of the pit, then being tossed in by several mourners. The passage begins to shake violently as priests run back up the stairs away from the abyss, seemingly scared of whatever's going on down there. Next, inside of the room with the abyss, more priests begin to file out in the entryway. As the sacrifice, which appears to have failed due to the circumstances surrounding Sae's death, results in Sae reappearing from the pit, along with an eruption of a black cloud of demon spirits flooding the chamber before bursting out into the entire village and gripping the night's blue sky with its jet black grasp. As Mio comes to, now back at the top of the stairs again, she is joined by the evil spirit of the Kusabi. As he closes his distance towards her with only cruel intentions, Mio knows she needs to deal with the Kusabi the same way she's dealt with every other evil entity throughout the night. After successfully utilizing the Camera Obscura, Mio heads back down the stairwell to the bottom of the chamber where she finds Mayu standing, again head down, emotionless, at the edge of the abyss, repeating the phrase,
I kept waiting.
before snapping her head up, locking eyes with Mio and saying,
Shall we begin?
As Mio rushes towards Mayu, the room flashes as they find themselves, seconds before alone, now surrounded on all sides by dozens of ritual priests. Moving towards her, Mio listens as Mayu begins explaining her knowledge of what was going to happen next, insisting that even though they were born together, they could not die together, and that the ritual still must be completed. In doing so, the result would be them becoming one and remaining together forever, as promised. As the priests slam their ceremonial staffs to the ground over and over, Mayu lays down on a large stone at the edge of the pit, bringing Mio down to rest just above her. Mio, who seems to be locked in a state of shock, does not react as Mayu takes Mio's hands, bringing them to Mayu's neck, forcing Mio to strangle her, before killing Mayu. Still in complete shock, Mio then stands again as several mourners lift Mayu's now lifeless body and toss it into the hellish abyss, completing the crimson sacrifice ritual. From the darkness of the pit rises a single crimson butterfly, which seems to be that of Mayu. As it flies through the cavern, Mio gives chase, realizing that this butterfly is leading her out of the village. With tears in her eyes, Mio continually apologizes to her sister for what has happened. As they reach the top of the hill overlooking the village, Mio collapses to her knees, inconsolably crying, as the single butterfly now joins what looks to be dozens of others, flying across a sunrise piercing through the once jet-black sky. Finally, the scene jumps forward in time to an unstated date as Mio sits on a bench in the spot where the villager once sat, now replaced by a lake that had been scheduled to be constructed in the place of the area. The scene pans down from Mio's face to show a crimson mark around her throat resembling a crimson butterfly. A mark, forever showing Mayu and Mio's together as one, as the scene fades hearing Mayu speak to Mio one last time.
Didn't we always promise each other? Together. Forever.
Learning from the lesson of the first game's convoluted titles given to each of the endings, Tecmo gave each of the endings in Fatal Frame 2 a unique name this go around. There's a total of 6 endings spread across all the releases of the game, 3 of which can be viewed on the original PS2 iteration, a 4th that was added to the Xbox re-release, along with another 2 for the Wii U remake. Going in depth with each, we already spoke on the original ending, which is obtained by simply beating the game the first time. This ending is called the Crimson Butterfly ending, and is for all intents and purposes the canonical ending of the entire story being told in Fatal Frame 2. Mayu allowing Mio to go through with the ritual, becoming a Crimson Butterfly and keeping their promise to stay together and become one with Mio via the Crimson Butterfly mark on her neck. The first alternate ending, titled Hellish Abyss, which can only be achieved on the hard difficulty, sees a new in-game chapter, where in the first ending approaching Mayu would end the game after defeating Makabe's Kusabi form, now adds new dialogue and sees a true final battle with the spirit of Sae Kurosawa. After defeating Sae, this ending is unlocked, seeing Mio's final snapshot separate the binds of Sae's spirit, freeing Mayu. As both Mayu and Sae fall backwards into the hellish abyss, Mio leaps forward, grabbing her sister's hand, saving her from certain death. In a panic, however, Mayu instructs Mio not to look down into the abyss. Whether out of her control or genuine curiosity, Mio disregards this and looks down into the abyss beyond her sister, seeing hundreds of spirits in the pit. We then see a time skip to the two sisters sitting on a bench before standing. Mayu first, then moments later Mio rises, with a bandage wrapped around her eyes. The after effects of those sheer glimpse of all those spirits in that hellish abyss, permanently blinding her, much the same way it had done to every one of the mourners. As the two walk forward and the screen fades, you hear Mayu's last words.
Together, forever.
The third ending obtained is actually the easiest to unlock. It's titled Runaway or Lingering Scent. It's achieved at the start of Chapter 8. After seeing the spirits capture Mayu on the staircase heading up to Kureha's shrine, instead of heading out after Mayu, if the player turns and simply goes to the tunnel beneath Kureha's shrine, we see Mio running away alone, apologizing to her sister for not being able to keep her promise and stay together forever. The voice of Sae Kurosawa calls from behind,
Don't look back.
Then the voice of Mayu calls out, causing Mio to stop. As another voice, this the voice of Itsuki Tachibana, tells her to keep on running. Ignoring this voice and turning back to her sister, Mio is frozen in fear as the sight of Sae rushing towards her, causing Mio to pass out. Awakening sometime later, Mio finds herself on the forest floor next to the dam that now replaces Minakami Village. Calling out to her sister several times, the screen fades away as the player's choice sees Mayu endure the same eternal fate as Sae, forever awaiting her sister's return to help her complete the ritual. This ending does not give the player any unlockables or endgame results. Instead, choosing this ending results in a game over screen, so it's kind of 50-50 whether this is to even be considered an ending or just a long-winded game over cutscene. However, since it features different scenarios, it's included. The fourth ending, which can only be obtained on the Xbox Director's Cut port, is titled The Promise Ending. It begins with Mio running down the tunnel leading to the ritual site, arriving at the sacrifice stone and seeing Mayu standing at the edge of the hellish abyss, with ritual priests in line to the left or right of her. With the priests all banging their staffs onto the rock floor of the cavern and chanting the hums of the Crimson Sacrifice ritual, Mio runs towards Mayu, who is herself walking forward to the pit preparing to complete the ritual. As Mio calls out to her sister, she's stopped dead in her tracks as the spirit of Yae Kurosawa springs forward from her own body and heads to where Mayu was moments earlier, now instead seeing Sae standing in her place. Yae goes on to apologize to Sae, promising she would keep her promise to stay with her forever. The two then turned towards the pit and began walking to its edge, preparing to both leap into the abyss. As the two leap, Mio reaches out and grabs at Sae, where, as the twins fall into the pit, Mayu is rescued with seconds to spare. Pulling her free from the spirit of Sae, Mio and Mayu watch as Sae and Yae fall together holding hands, keeping their promise to stay together forever after the completion of this ritual. As Mio holds Mayu, crying tears of joy, a collection of crimson butterflies emerges from the pit and flies away, releasing the captured souls of all that were bound due to their repentance. As the butterflies fade into the distance, Mio and Mayu reflect on the events they had faced and reassure each other the intention to forever keep their promise and stay together for eternity. The final two endings, which were only available on the Wii U Deep Crimson Butterfly remake. The fifth ending, which is titled the Shadow Festival ending, is acquired only after defeating the Kusabi spirit in over 5 minutes. This may seem like a strangely specific requirement, but taking over 5 minutes helps lay out the following events. Defeating the Kusabi, the tunnel is filled with the cries of the ritual priests running up the steps as Mio approaches Mayu, who is sitting at the edge of the abyss. As the screen flashes and the sisters are replaced by Yae and Sae, Mayu tells Mio that it's too late and that the repentance has already been unleashed. Flashing back now to the Amakura sisters,
If you had only fled from here, you at least would have been saved.
Mio, now sitting next to her sister Mayu, tells her that she could not go forward and break her promise and abandon her sister. She tells her that even if the moment that they have left is short, she'd rather spend it with her than an entire life alone. As Mio rests her head on her sister's shoulders, the repentance combusts from the hellish abyss, sending its evil into the world. The scene then switches to a flashback as the two are attending a festival, filled with joy watching dozens of lanterns being released into the sky. A moment of happiness, the two of them together. Switching back to the two collapsed next to the abyss, still flooding the chamber, a scene of Itsuki, who is still in prison, releases a crimson butterfly as the night sky outside darkens, and the repentance drowns the moon's gaze, once again repeating the ill-fated past of Minakami's village. Shifting back to Mio and Mayu, the two now lay motionless, holding each other closely at the ritual site, leaving the interpretation that they fulfilled their promise and stayed together forever, dying in each other's arms as their repentance reclaimed the land and everyone left, including Mio and Mayu. The sixth and final ending, titled the Frozen Butterfly Ending, is obtained after defeating the Kusabi in under 5 minutes, along with drawing the final battle out with Sae. Moments after defeating Sae, Mio reaches Mayu, holding her and saying she'd never leave her side. Mayu responds by telling Mio she knows what she needs her to do. As we begin to see flashbacks of rituals past, Mayu slowly moves Mio's hands towards her own neck. However, this time, snapping out of the trance-like effect, Mio jerks herself away from Mayu, refusing to sacrifice her sister. Mayu rises to her feet as she accepts that Mio could never kill her. Mayu then tells Mio,
If we won't truly be together, if we won't become one, then I don't mind if I'm in hell.
Mayu then breaks out into a maniacal fit of both uncontrollable laughter and inconsolable crying, just like Sae. Then we see a flashback of when the moment Mayu had fallen in the woods as children, recalling her reacting the exact same way then. Mayu then tells Mio that they would stay in this place together forever, as she now moves her hand onto her sister's throat, causing Mio to faint. As the next scene begins, we see a crimson butterfly drifting along a floor lined with dead bodies. As it comes to rest on Mio's shoulder, who is now in a trance-like state, resting her head on Mayu's lap as her sister gently strokes her hair. As the scene fades, filled with deafening silence, the two sit seemingly trapped in this village for eternity. The post-credit scene shows the two now in the doll shrine, Mio laying still and motionless as Mayu slowly puts makeup on her. The two still in the same emotionless state they were seen last in the chamber. Mayu kisses Mio on her cheek as a stream of tears slowly falls from Mio's eyes. Throughout all of these endings, it's clear that Mio is destined to sacrifice her sister Mayu. Studying the journals throughout the village would indicate as much, with the entire story's journey being that the youngest sister be sacrificed in the ritual. However, interestingly enough, there's a slight inaccuracy that was lost in the English translation of the game. In its original Japanese presentation, Mio frequently refers to her sister as Oni-chan, which directly translates to Big Sister, indicating that Mayu was the true Big Sister the entire time. For one reason or another, the English translation team opted to instead have Mio only call her by her name, which is kind of a bummer. Having her at any point throughout the story indicate that in any way Mayu was the big sister would have helped us set up the game's big ending game plot twist. Expecting the younger sister to be the one who is sacrificed, only to find out in the end of the game that it's actually the firstborn who's actually set to be sacrificed. The entire twist is lost due to the fact that the North American players were never truly informed on who was older. And judging by the cutscenes, you would assume Mio is older, from the flashbacks rescuing Mayu after her fall, all the way up to Mayu needing Mio to be by her side to even travel through the village. At the end of the day, does this affect the endgame? Of course not. We still see the tragedy of the Crimson Sacrifice ritual carry over from past to present, as Mio struggles to come to grips with the reality of their destiny. Just an interesting tidbit I found while researching the game that I figured I'd just throw in. And while we're at the tidbits, here's another while sewing up the spoilers that some may have missed. The sister Yai Kurosawa, who ran away with the help of Itsuki Tachibana, who was later rescued by the man Ryozo Munakata, are in fact the same Yai and Ryozo from the first Fatal Frame. The two married and had a child named Mikoto, who had a child named Miyuki, who is the mother of the main characters in the first game, Miko and Mafuyu Hinasaki. If you knew, you knew, and if you don't know, now you know. This is one of the coolest reveals to a guy like me, because I love those small continuities. If you dive into Fatal Frame 2 and it be your first game, it's still just a good ass game, but if you're somebody like me who comes back from the first game, this is beautiful to tie this world into one big thing and reward returning players. Much like the first Fatal Frame, Crimson Butterfly offers a large list of new game goodies locked behind various difficulty playthroughs, clearing the game in so many hours, as well as the return of those mission-based minigames, which this time sees the player face various stipulations, both time and score-based, in order to unlock those in-game rewards. There's 25 of these missions this go around, and like the first game, any upgrade to your Camera Obscura that you made throughout the many of your playthroughs carry over to this mode. Alternate endings, an art gallery, promotional trailers, various costumes, camera add-ons, and difficulties, along with that spirit list, all help to fill out a very bountiful endgame. Now, of all these unlockables, my personal favorite is a set of costumes that Mio and Mayu get, seeing their standard clothing be replaced by Sae and Yai's white kimonos, with Mayu's even getting the blood splatters across the front exactly like Sae's, as well as her skin tone appearing paler. The other costumes are more common palette swaps and kimono designs, but the Kurosawa Easter egg kimonos were really an awesome addition to the post-game rewards. In post-release, Fatal Frame 2 did more than enough to both expand on the legacy of the first game, as well as land itself on practically every single top 5 survival horror game list ever created. Believing in his vision from the first game and choosing to flesh out that story proved to be the best thing Shibata could have done, as the game single-handedly took this obscure franchise and raised it to a point where even today it still shines as one of those quintessential 6th-gen survival horror must-plays. Outside of the franchise, Mio and Mayu make cameo appearances as an in-game trophy in Super Smash Bros. For the Wii U, as well as a piece of concept art featuring the two in Tecmo's Super Swing Golf. However, neither are playable characters in either game. Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly improved on the first game's attempts at survival horror by incorporating a more compelling story, all the while maintaining and evolving its unique take on this genre. Far more beloved and remembered than its predecessor, Crimson Butterfly still stands to this day as one of the finest pieces of survival horror ever created.
And so there you have Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly. An amazing follow-up to a very solid first game. I personally was a fan of the first game a lot, but, you know, as discussed earlier, a lot of the public just didn't take to that game much, and Makoto Shibata and the entire team at Tecmo felt like they still had something worth fighting for. So with number 2, taking the story in a completely different direction, not dialing down too much on the scares, but making the story more compelling and creating an atmosphere for the consumer to be drawn into. They did an excellent job. Like I said, just Google top 5, top 3 survival horror games of all time, and I promise you it's top 5, if not top 3, on like every list you'll ever find. It stands the test of time, and it was a good play. So from here, we know where we're going next. Fatal Frame 3, The Tormented. Give that time to breathe, and it'll exist like these other two did. They take a little long, but that's because, honestly, like I say every single time, I'm the one-man band. I don't have anybody to edit or mix or record script besides myself. It's all me. I do all my own gameplay and everything, so it just takes a long time. Down to the point where I'm such like a perfectionist, or I'm so critical on myself. This outro right here is different than the intro. You go back to the intro, and I think I haven't even cut my hair yet. Like, I gotta be on point. And so when it comes out from me, it's pretty much as on point as I'd like it to be. I'll always critique myself, but that's just me. Outside of the Fatal Frame series and the channel in general, I do want to say thank you to everybody who helped me hit my first milestone, which is 100 subs. It may not be big to a lot of people. It's small grapes to some, but like 100 people were actively like, hey, this dude knows what the hell he's talking about with games. Let's sign up. But outside of that, thank you as always. Every like, subscription, comment, share, it's all appreciated. I need every single one, and I appreciate every single one. So tell a friend that, you know, hey, there's this guy that kind of knows what he's talking about with games, and send him to the channel. And when you do that, I promise you I appreciate every single person that does. So until the next one, thank you guys as always.